Time to start.
Danielle. Yeah. Danielle, you got to go.
I got it.
All righty.
Hey,
Okay.
Danielle.
Hey guys.
Hey, Danielle. Hey, good to have you. And who else do we have tonight? Do we have anybody?
Yeah.
else?
Anybody
Not
else?
that y'all aren't anybody.
Well, I'm
Did-
here.
I'm here.
I'm here.
Judy
Yeah.
and Sherry,
Roll
Yeah.
call. Here.
Here.
Sherry and Sherry.
Janelle.
Did I hear Judy?
Yeah, Janelle's here.
We
Oh,
have
there
it.
you go, Judy.
Hey,
And
Yeah. Janelle.
Janelle.
Janelle's here.
oh,
Yes.
Janelle. Okay.
Yep.
Cool.
And
Mhm.
Betty's here.
Yay.
Betty.
Yep.
Awesome.
And Janet?
And Janet. Okay. Very cool. Okay. Anybody else that they might come in later, but we'll let them join. Okay. Like we were discussing before, there's a lot going on in this chapter. There's not going to be a quiz on the names or the dates of people that we discussed tonight. And we could just say, look, a lot of things happen. North and South just fought and fought and fought and fought. And that's how it is. But I really want to go over this, and whether you are able to keep up or get it all in your mind, don't worry about it if you can't, because it is a lot of names and a lot of things going on. But I still want to address it because God addressed it and thought it was important to put in here. But it is awesome if once you we do this study of chapter 11, if you have time to read the back section, the back of this book on page 111 is Major Events of Israel's History. And it goes through a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight, about the king of the south and the king of the north, the Persians and the Greeks and Antiochus and the Romans. It is a very good read. So if you have time to read that, that will also, the more you hear this stuff, the more you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember that, So this may be the first time you're introduced to it, maybe the second or whatever, but at least we're going to, I'm going to introduce you to these people. So here we go on the roller coaster ride. Okay. So Daniel 11. Now on your handout, I kind of put a little outline there that verse 1, and we'll talk about that in a minute, really goes to chapter 10. Verse 2 is the Persian prophecy. 3 and 4 is Alexander the Great. Verses 5 through 20 are the kings of the north and kings of the south, their wars that's going on. And then 25 to 30 is the despicable person, Antiochus Epiphanes. And then the last few verses is the Antichrist. Now we're not going to get past verse 35. That'll be for next week. But what we're going to look at is, and you could even use this as a title for chapter 11, History of the 5 A's. Okay.
Yeah.
History of the 5 A's. We have Ahasuerus. In verse 2, we have Alexander the Great, we have Antiochus the Great, Antiochus Epiphanes, and then we have the Antichrist. Okay, so those are the 5 A's we're going to talk about tonight. So that easy peasy, right? We got that. We got that part. Now let's get down to the nitty gritty. Okay, let's pray before we start. Okay. Our Father, thank you so much for your word, and that you are the God of history. You are the God of the future. You're the God of the nations, and you're God of the people. Lord, you have orchestrated what will happen with these nations in Daniel's time. And you were generous enough to let Daniel know what the future was for him, and he wrote it down. And we can now study it. And Lord, I pray that we will be faithful to your word, faithful to this message that you wanted Daniel to know and that you want us to know. And I just thank you for being that loving and gracious Father. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. So here we go. Daniel 11:1. He says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I rose to be of assistance and protection for him. Now we know that this is not Daniel talking. This is Gabriel talking. This is the continuation of chapter 10. Okay. So again, we talked about last week, 10, 11, and 12 are all one vision. It's all one thing. Chapter divisions are not inspired. They were put in by the translators. And so they decided for some reason to divide chapter 11 right there. But we say the first year of Darius the Mede, this is in 538 BC, is when Darius the Mede was. And like we said in chapter 10, that this was 2 years after the vision of chapter 9. So it's a continuation of chapter 10. And he says, I arose to be of assistance and protection for him. We believe that this is Gabriel speaking, even though Gabriel isn't named in chapter 10. We really think that this is Gabriel. And the angel's role in the Persian Empire shows the supernatural protection of God for King Darius the Mede. God was protecting and assisting Darius the Mede. Even though he's not a believer, he was a ruler of a country. And so he affirms that God is working in Darius, or you could say Cyrus, again, another name, in Cyrus letting the Israelites go back to Jerusalem to build their temple and to build their walls. And we saw that in that decree, we saw last week, I believe, in Ezra, that there was a inventory of the things that they took back to the temple. It's in Ezra 6. If you have a chance and want to go back and read that, in Ezra 6 talks about all the things they took back to Jerusalem. In fact, I don't think we talked about this, but do go back and read Ezra 6. It's very, very interesting, because it does say that Darius the Mede decreed that the full cost of the rebuilding was to be paid from the royal treasury. The Persians were going to pay for the rebuilding of the temple, and that any violation of this decree would result in death. That's how serious this pagan king was about getting the Jews back to Jerusalem and helping them build their temple. Something really impacted his life about the Jews. And like we talked about, it could be the lion's den. Could have been that influenced him so greatly. So anyway, this angel is very instrumental in protecting the Persian king. And so we see that. Now it says, verse 2, and now I tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them as soon as he becomes strong through his riches. Now, the 3 kings that come after Darius, there are 3. I'm not even going to pronounce their names. Just take my word for it. There's 3 kings. But the 4th one is the one we're really concerned about. The 4th king is Xerxes the First. And that's the one that the angel is talking about. The 4th one is going to come up, and he's going to be very rich and very powerful. Now, Xerxes, Daniel has them. The 3 kings there. Now, the 4th one's the one that we're concerned about, because that's the one the angel is focusing on. Xerxes the First, also known as Ahasuerus, the king during Esther's time. So you can put the book of Esther in here. It's after Daniel, even though Esther, the book of Esther, comes way before Daniel. At the book of Esther in the timeline comes a little long, about 50, 70 years after Daniel here. Okay. So now Xerxes or Ahasuerus is said to have ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. I mean, this Persian Empire is huge. He's huge. He's one of the greatest Oriental rulers of all time. He had a fabulous wealth. He commanded the largest army in the ancient world. In fact, he commanded the largest army that we know in ancient history. And he decided that he wanted to attack Greece. And the mood of the other three kings was moving that way. The first three, they were all kind of moving toward attacking Greece. Where Xerxes, he decided it's time. So this fourth one really stirred up all he had to attack Greece. And he actually utterly almost destroyed Greece, but the Greeks never forgot about it. Then later, another 150 years later goes by, and a lot of other kings have come along, but they still have not forgotten Xerxes, the Greeks. They still haven't forgotten. And the Greeks finally got their act together and decided to retaliate about what this guy had done 150 years before. And they came, and when they came led by another king who is called Alexander. And he's the second king, Alexander, in verse 3. Verse 3 says, and a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. Okay, now this is talking about Alexander the Great. Verse 4, but as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority, which he wielded, because his sovereignty will be removed and given to others beside them. Okay, so now this is talking about Alexander the Great. Now we've talked about him before, and he is the mighty king in this prophecy. He is the bronze part of the statue in Daniel chapter 2. He's the leopard that we talked about in chapter 7. He's the male shaggy goat that we talked about in Daniel 8. And so he defeated and replaced the Medo-Persian Empire. And that is no small feat. When we talk about the Persian Empire being from India to Ethiopia, and they had so much wealth, they had so many soldiers, and here comes little tiny Alexander the Great, and he defeats them. And that has to be God. That is God playing out his plan for history. So when we look at all this that's going to happen in chapter 11, we need to remind ourselves what we saw in chapter 10, that there are invisible angelic conflicts between the good and the evil angelic beings. And that is what's going on behind the scenes. We're seeing how it's being played out in history. Okay? So Alexander the Great is the verses in verse 3 and 4. And then, of course, we talked about he'd had no descendants. He died early, about 33 years old. And verse 4 says, as soon as he has risen, Greece, of course, Greece did not exist at the time that this was being spoken to of Daniel. Greece didn't even exist as a nation or an empire or anything. So between now and the 300 BCs, Greece became an empire. Okay, but this verse describes the rapid rise of Alexander the Great, and he only he conquered for about 8 years, and then he died early, an unexpected death without an heir. His kingdom will be broken up, and it's broken up with the 4 generals. Okay, and the 4 generals, 2 of them are the ones that we're going to be discussing tonight. The other 2 just kind of fizzled out, or just were really non-important to Israel. Okay, the king of the north and the king of the south are the ones that we're going to focus on: the Ptolemy dynasty and the Seleucid dynasty. Those are the 2 generals that the angel here is going to be discussing. Now, so when we say a king of the south or king of the north in this chapter, it doesn't mean that that is one king. It's just talking about the kings at that time. And there's many kings that went through the ranks of the north and the south. So when it says king of the south at that time, it may not be the same one that we talked about earlier about the king of the south. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so verse 5, then the king of the south will grow strong along with one of its princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and rule. His dominion will be great and his realm indeed. Now, also to understand that this battle between the north and the south, Israel's in the middle, and they're just kind of being torn between the north and the south. Whoever was stronger at that point, they were ruled over the king of the north, or if south won, they were ruled over the king of the south. So Israel just kind of went back and forth, wherever the wind blew in that direction. Okay, the king of the south would be the Ptolemy dynasty. The general Ptolemy took over the king of the south, which was Egypt. Okay, and it says, shall be strong and of his princes. That is the princes of Alexander, the generals that ruled over that dynasty. He will be strong above him and have dominion. Now, the Seleucid dynasty is built in the north. The Ptolemy dynasty is built in the south. The Ptolemy dynasty starts out a little more powerful, but it doesn't take long until the north becomes more powerful, and the expansion of the north develops. The north has places to go, a lot of things that they can conquer. The south is pretty much Egypt, and they don't really go to the south or to the west, because there's not a lot there to conquer. But there is a city in the south, which is Alexandria, that was very valuable. So the north has to do mainly, when you think of king of the north, you think of Syria. Syria is north of Israel, and that's kind of the 2 areas that we're going to be dealing with tonight: Syria, Israel, and Egypt. Okay. Now, verse 6, and after some years, they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to reach an agreement. But she will not keep her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up along with those who brought her in, and one who fathered her, as well as he who supported her in those times. Now, there's a lot in there. Oh, I meant to tell you too. The reason this chapter is so important is I read in 2 different commentaries that there are 130 fulfilled prophecies in this chapter, just in Daniel 11. That's amazing.
Wow.
That's amazing. And that's why it's so important to go through this, because all of this is fulfilled exactly the way the angel described it to Daniel. And that's why there are some people who doubt God's word, say, well, that's so incredible. Daniel couldn't have been written until maybe 60 BC, after all this has happened. But if someone wrote it in 60 BC, I would think that they would be a lot more specific, because they have names and dates and everything else that they could go on. But this prophecy from the angel is a little vague, especially to Daniel, because he doesn't know exactly what the angel's talking about. But as it's happening, they're understanding it, okay? So there are a lot of prophecies fulfilled right in this chapter. Okay, so finally, in chapter 6, they're going to make an alliance. Now, how do you do that? It's the old-fashioned way.
Mary.
Marriage. Marriage. The king's daughter of the south comes to the king of the north to make an agreement. You give your daughter to the nation that you want to make a treaty with. He marries the guy, and you hope that that makes everything all right. But that calms everything down. And if you know anything about marriage, that nothing calm about that at all.
Nope.
It could go very wrong. Well, it did go very wrong. Let me tell you what happened. Okay. Okay. So the king of the north is Antiochus Theos. Okay. Now he is called the king of the north is Antiochus Theos. And the king of the south, of course, is Ptolemy Philadelphus. Now, all these kings of the south call themselves Ptolemy something. And most of the kings of the north, they like to use the word Antiochus. Okay. So the Ptolemy Philadelphus was the king of Egypt. And he says, you can marry my daughter. So Antiochus Theos decided that what he wanted to do was marry the king of the daughter of Egypt, but unfortunately he was already married. Well, that posed a problem for them because they didn't take several wives, apparently. So no problem. He divorced his wife. No problem at all. So we're trying to make peace here. this is okay. So he's already married. He divorces his wife. And he marries the daughter of the southern king. Well, his wife was called Laodice. And she wasn't very thrilled about it. She didn't take this marriage very kindly. Okay. So no problem. So she murders the new wife. This could be a great miniseries, I'm just telling you. So Laodice murders the first wife, which is I call her Bernice, or it's Berenice, I think, but I call her Bernice. We'll call her Bernice for brevity. So she murders Bernice, the new wife, but she also murders all her attendants that came with her. And then she poisons Antiochus. She didn't stop. She just kept on going. Okay, so she didn't trust Antiochus, so she murders him as well. So when it says, yeah, I mean, yeah, let's kill them all. So when it says, let's see, after some years they will form an alliance. The daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to reach an agreement. That's the marriage. But she will not keep her position of power. That's Bernice. Bernice is not going to keep that position as the queen, nor will he remain with his power. Antiochus gets killed as well. But she will be given up along with those who brought her in. Okay. Now, what that means is that all her attendants that came with her from Egypt. Okay. Laodice murders all her attendants, and the one who fathered her as well as he who supported her in those times. Now, we're not sure exactly what that last part means, but there is an idea. it could be that whom she brought forth. Some say that it actually says whom she fathered. So it could be that they also murdered her sons as well. But there was one commentary I read, and I thought it was a little interesting. He that strengthened her could be her father, because he died a little before this, but he was so fond of her, Bernice, that he took care continually to send her fresh supplies of water from the Nile, thinking it is better for her to drink of that than any other river. Okay, so some say it could be her father. And I will tell you, I have seen the Nile, and I ain't drinking any of that. But maybe it was a lot cleaner back then.
Yeah, back in them days, yes.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a lot cleaner back then. But also, you understand that the Egyptians view the Nile as a god, a river of life. Okay, and so for him to give her water from the Nile would be very normal for them, because they're Egyptians. It's strange to us, but they're Egyptians. So the Nile is a very important river to them in their worship. Okay, so in other words, everybody involved is going to go, and that's exactly what happened. Okay, so does that make sense so far?
Yes.
All right, good deal. Let's go. Okay. Now, verse 7. One of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and prevail. Okay. So out of a branch of her roots, or one of the descendants of her line, is two ways of saying it. Out of the branch or a descendant, okay, that would be either a brother or a relative in the south. He comes with an army against who is now, since Antiochus is dead, it's Callinicus, I think. Okay. His name is Ptolemy Euergetes, and Callinicus is the king of the north now. Okay. Now, the king of the south fights the king of the north, and he defeats him. And he will prevail. That's what the king of the south does. Now in verse 8, and he will also take into captivity to Egypt their gods, the king of the north's gods, and their cast metal images, and their precious vessels of silver and gold, and he, on his part, will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. So history tells us that the king of the south attacks the king of the north and defeats them, and he takes 40,000 talents of silver and 2,500 idol statues. And it goes on about an inventory of things that the king of the south took back. And also the king of the north, he did die. Callinicus died because he fell off his horse. Okay. So the king of the south shall continue, verse 8. He will also take into captivity. Yeah, we read that. And then he will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. So there was some time there that there was no fighting going on between the north and the south. Okay. So, verse 9. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. Now, Callinicus has two sons. It says, verse 10, And his sons will mobilize and assemble a great multitude of great forces, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, so that he may wage war up to his fortress. So the king of the north had two sons. One of his sons died. The other one became the king of the north, and his name is Antiochus the Great. Okay. And it says he would come with a multitude of great forces, and history tells us that he had 75,000 soldiers, and he came to attack Egypt, and he stomped right up through the land of Israel. Then verse 11 says, and the king of the south will be enraged and go out and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be handed over to the former. Okay. So the king of the south is Ptolemy, also known by Philometor. He had 73,000 men, 55,000 cavalry, and he also had 73 elephants. Which I was thinking about those elephants today, and I'm thinking 73 elephants. Can you imagine lining up 73 elephants and attacking or defending, your borders with these elephants? And they were use these elephants like battering rams, and I think one commentary I read said 5 of the elephants died. And I'm like, how do you kill an elephant before rifles? How do you kill? Here I'm thinking, this is my rabbit trail. How do you kill elephants? But this is a knife and spear war. It's very much like the war that's going to happen in the tribulation, that big battle of Armageddon. Is hand-to-hand combat. There isn't any automatic weapons going on here in the tribulation. And maybe they'll be using elephants. I don't know. But I didn't see any elephants in Israel when I went, but who knows? Who knows? I just thought it was interesting. How do you kill an elephant? Anyway, we'll go moving right along. Now, verse 12. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be haughty, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. Okay, verse 12 says the he's and hims kind of get a little confusing. But the king of the south is very effective in battle. The history says they caused the north, Antiochus the Great, to lose 10,000 footmen, 30 cavalry, and that's where it says 5 elephants. So Antiochus the Great attacks the south but does not prevail. Okay. Did somebody have a question? Okay. So this made the king of the north even more angry. So in verse 13, it says, for the king of the north will again rise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years, he will press on with a great army and much equipment. So the king of the north is going to return after a few years. I don't know why. Why do men have to fight like this? Why don't you just stay home and just stay in your own house? Why do these rulers have to go, keep fighting other countries? It's ridiculous. So anyway, the king of the north decides
Testosterone.
Something. I don't know. Yeah.
Yes.
Too much of it. Okay. So the king of the north is going to return. He returns with a multitude greater than the last time. It was 13 years later, actually, that he came back with a great army and great riches, and he came back to get his revenge. Now in verse 14. Now, in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. The violent ones among her people will also arise themselves up to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Okay. Let me see. the violent ones. That's what I was looking for. It says, the violent ones among your people will also rise themselves to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Now, what does that mean, the violent ones? Some versions talk about they're robbers of thy people is another version of it. And what this is of thy, and that's kind of a good phrase, robbers of thy people, because the angel's talking to Daniel. And so he would be talking about Daniel's people. Who are the robbers of Daniel's people? Well, these are covenant breakers. These are people who didn't keep, Jews who didn't keep the law, who decided to help the South. They're in the South. They're in Egypt, and they're Jews, but they decide that they're going to join the rebellion against the king of the South. So they actually help get the king of the South defeated because they joined the rebellion, which like a lot of mercenary soldiers, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, anytime there's a revolution, there are some people who are just going to join it. They don't care about the cause because they see where there is money to be made. Anytime there's war going on, somebody's making some money. Okay, so these are people who decided they wanted to help in the rebellion. Okay. Then verse 15, then the king of the north will come up and pile up an assault ramp and capture a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength left for them to stand. So it kind of describes the battle here, and if you want to know who won, the north won on this one. The north literally routed the south and destroyed them. So this time the north wins. Now in verse 16. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stray for a time in the beautiful land with destruction in his hands. Now he comes up, the king of the north, which is Antiochus the Great. He's going to do what he wants. Now, the beautiful land or the glorious land, that, of course, that's talking about Israel. And here again, we see Antiochus actually paid some of the Jews, some of the, what do you call them? Mercenaries, if you will, paid them money or treated them with some kind of favor and said, you help me. He did it with the north and the south. You know, you help me overcome the south, and I will make it worth your while. So he was quite the flatterer. But of course, once he overcame the south, Israel still did not get their independence. All they did is got domination by Assyrian power. Okay. So because some of them had assisted in the battle with the south, he gave them money, he treated them with a favor, but he was basically their captor. So they just went from one master to another. Yeah. Now, with the defeat of the Egyptians, Antiochus required complete control over Israel. Now, this is important because it sets the stage for the reign of terror that's going to follow with the next Antiochus. Okay. So now the king of the north has control of Israel. Now, verse 17. He will set his mind on coming with the power of his entire kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Interesting story here. Okay. Antiochus does something interesting. He sets his face to enter the strength of his whole kingdom and upright ones with him. He gives the daughter of women, or the version says he gives the daughter of women to ruin it. Okay. So the phrase there is that he is going to pick some fabulously lovely person, turns out to be his daughter, to marry the king of Egypt. Her name was Cleopatra.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, we always say, oh, Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Wrong Cleopatra. This is Cleopatra the First. There were many Cleopatras. Cleopatra the Seventh was actually the one most people know of, which had to do with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and that kind of thing. Okay. But Cleopatra the First, now she was a very young girl, but she was apparently, they don't say how old she was, but she was apparently old enough to where the king of the North, Antiochus the Great, sends her to be married to the king of the South and be a traitor. She was going to be a spy and a traitor for her father. Okay. Now, the king of the South was 7 years old. Okay. 7 years old. Okay. And she liked him. He won her heart. Okay. She liked this little kid. And so Cleopatra said, I'm not going to be your spy for you. I'm not going to trade. I'm not going to be your traitor. And so his plan did not work out. Okay. So that's what it says. When he set his mind on coming with the power of his entire king and bringing with him a proposal of peace, which is the daughter of his marriage with Cleopatra and the king of 7-year-old Egypt, which he will put into effect. He will give him the daughter of women to ruin it. That's what it means, to be the traitor. But she will not stand for him or be on his side. So that's what it's talking about, that she got there and became enthralled with the young king and said, I like Egypt and I'm not going to help you destroy it. So it backfired on him. Okay, now verse 17. No, we did that one. And you know, you think, now why does the Bible put all these little details in here? To show that God is in absolute control of all of history, all of it. Even when kings devise a plan to destroy another nation, to take over Israel, God turns the heart of kings and he turns the heart of people, and he uses all of that to bring about the history that he wants to happen. So he determines the boundaries. He determines the story, because it's his story, is history. Now, verse 18, then he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many, but a commander will put a stop to his taunting against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his taunting. Now, so Antiochus had conquered a lot of the world, but he decided, since he's not going back to Egypt, his daughter was no use to him. So he decides to go to the coastlands, which is the Mediterranean islands, the borders of Greece. And so he's kind of edging toward Greece again. And Rome actually had control of Greece and those Mediterranean islands. So he turns his face to the coast, and this made Rome very angry. Okay. So the Rome sent a commander called Lucius Cornelius Scipio, who was sent to Antiochus the Great, forcing him to withdraw. And then Antiochus took refuge in Antioch, which is his land. So when it says he turns his face to the coastland, a commander put a stop to his taunting. Moreover, he will repay him for his taunting. Now, and that's the Roman soldier that came and said, don't be messing with Rome. And he left. So verse 19, so he will turn his face toward the fortress of his own land. So he went back to, actually some say Antioch, but he will stumble and fall and not be found. Now here is his demise. Antiochus the Great is realizes he can't go into Egypt and take over that. He can't go over to the Mediterranean islands or Greece. He can't take over that because Rome. So he goes back to his own lands, and he said, in a fit one time, he tried to plunder the temple in his own land and steal all the treasures there. Now, the Seleucid temples were known for their gold around them and the gold in them. They were often target of the kings who needed money to fight their battles. So Antiochus the Great decided to go loot one of his own god's temples, and the people got angry with him, and they murdered him because of it, and they never found him again. Okay. So when it says he turned his face toward the fortress of his own land, he will stumble and fall, and he will not be found. That's what that's all about. And that's the end of Antiochus the Great. Any questions so far? Okay. Moving to the juicy stuff. Okay, verse 20. Then in his palace one will arise who will allow an oppressor to pass through the jewel of his kingdom, yet within a few days he will be broken, though not in anger nor in battle. Okay. The guy who stood up in his own estate was a raiser of taxes, some say. Now, Rome decided, let's see, where are we? Rome decided that they were going to require taxes from the king of the north. And that's why he went to loot the temple as well. Okay, so we've met 3 of the A's: Ahasuerus, Alexander the Great, and Antiochus the Great. Now we're going to meet Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay. So we meet now in his estate is a vile person. Verse 21. And in his place a despicable person will arise, on whom the majesty of kingship has not been conferred, but he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. Okay, so this is exactly, we've talked about this last time about Antiochus the Epiphanes. He's a vile, despicable person. How would you like that on your epitaph? Here lies a vile, despicable person. He's called in the Bible vile and despicable. He's rotten to the core, like the Grinch. And to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom. And they didn't, they don't give it to him. He comes in sneaky with deceit, and he obtains it by flattery. He doesn't actually, he's not the next in line, but he bribes people and he overtakes the throne. He had no right to reign, no legitimate claim to the throne, but he gained it by flattery. Now, verse 22. And the overflowing forces is made with him. He will practice deception. He will go up and gain power with a small force of people. Okay. Verse 22. Also with the prince of the covenant. He is, some aren't really sure what the prince of the covenant is. It could be that Antiochus Epiphanes we talked about, he had the high priest of Israel overthrown. Okay, so a lot of times the prince of the covenant might refer to the high priest of the Jews. Some say it's the king of Egypt, that he had some sort of peace treaty with. But it sounds very much like what Antiochus did with the high priest. So I think that's what that means. Now, verse 23, after an alliance is made with him, he will practice, deception. He will go up and gain power with a small force of people in a time of tranquility. Okay. Now it's very interesting that 24, he entered peaceably when Israel wasn't at war with anybody. And so he saw a whole bunch of money to be gained. And he came in with hearts and flowers and peace and saying, and so forth. And so he did what his fathers never did before. He gained greater acceptance. And then he got the spoil, and then he scattered it among the people, and he let them share it, and it made him look good. They gained trust of this man because of the money he was giving them, the peace and security that he was giving them. Then in verse 24, he was plotting against the strongholds, but only for a time. So on one hand, he looks like Robin Hood. On the other hand, he begins to move in his kingdom and he puts it down fast. He's building an incredible power base here. Verse 25, and he will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army. So the king of the south will mobilize an extremely large and mighty army for war, but he will not stand because schemes will be devised against him. So here's another war with Egypt. And Egypt loses. And it tells you why, because the counselors of the Egyptian king himself betrayed him. Okay. In fact, he trusted counselors, turned to them, and it says his own men plotted against him. Because schemes will be devised against him. That's talking about his own counselors, this king of the south. They plotted against him. Then verse 26, those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down and are slain. And then 27, as for the kings of their hearts will be intent on evil. They will speak lies to each other at the same table, but it will not succeed because the end will still come to the appointed time. So both of these men, the king of the south and the king of the north, they're evil men, but they come to a table. They come to a bargaining table, a treaty table. So you see all these guys around the big table, and they're signing these meaningless treaties. And you know how many treaties have been broken in the history of the world? All of them. Just wanted to get that in. Okay. All of them are broken. Okay. They sit at a table. They speak lies. They're supposed to talk about, their talk doesn't prosper, yet in the end shall be at the time appointed. They made promises they never meant to keep, but that was God's plan. Anyway, still, right? It's always still got part of God's plan. We think it's just the devil's winning. Well, he's not. Okay. This is part of God's plan. Then verse 28, then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action and return to his own land. Now, here we're right back in Israel. After Antiochus Epiphanes has this deceitful meeting in the south in Egypt, he comes back, and again, he does things against the holy covenant, against the Jewish people. He desecrates the land. He marches on Jerusalem. After he leaves this meeting with Egypt, he marched on, he sacked the city and cruelly slaughtered people and brought about some horrible suffering. Then he went back to Antioch. Then he returned to his own land, which is probably Antioch. Now, verse 29. At the appointed time, he will return and come into the south. He cannot leave Egypt alone. He returns to the south. But this last time, it will not turn out the way it did before. Okay, so Antiochus again attacks Egypt. Now, verse 29. Oh, verse 30. For the ships of of Kittim will come against him. Therefore, he will withdraw in fear and will return and curse the Holy Covenant and take action. And he will come back and pay attention to those who abandon the Holy Covenant. Now, a lot is going on there. Egypt calls for help from Rome. Egypt knows that the king of the north, Antiochus, is coming to attack him again. Egypt is calling in the cavalry. Hey, it's like the cowboys and Indians, and you hear the cavalry blowing their horn. Here comes the cavalry. That's Rome. Okay, Rome is going to come and help Egypt this time. Now, the ships of Kittim is they believe that this is the islands and coast of the Mediterranean Sea, especially the northern parts. He says the coast of Greece and Aegean Sea, those were all ruled by Rome. So that's why we know the ships of Kittim. This is Rome coming in. Rome is coming in to help Egypt. Okay, Egypt calls for the help from Rome, and there's a commander that confronts Antiochus and tells him, his name is Populus. He's telling him to withdraw Egypt or face the wrath of Rome. And in verse 30, he does exactly that. He returns back to Israel and to those who forsake the Holy Covenant. He gets back with these apostate Jews. Those are mercenaries, apostate Jews who left their religion, and he begins to raise support for them. Then verse 31 says, forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with regular sacrifice, and he will set up the abomination of desolation. Now, this is the first thing he does. He goes back into Israel, back into Jerusalem, and the first thing he does is he puts guards around the temple. Nobody can worship. He stops the sacrifices. He halts all worship, and then on a given Sabbath, he sends soldiers into the city. He slaughters all the children he can find, all the women, and then he makes heathen idolatry mandatory, and he puts then he has nakedness flaunted by those athletes in full view of the temple ground. He enforces Greek culture upon the Jews. He erects a statue of the main god of Greeks called Zeus on the very altar in the temple. He slays a pig on the altar in the temple, makes the priest eat pork. This is the abomination of desolation. He abominates the temple and makes it desolate. And he even had some of the Jews doing it with him. We think he's doing it all against the Jews. There were some of the Jews that were involved in this as well. They're apostate Jews. Okay, and then verse 32, and by the smooth words he will turn the godlessness those to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant, but the people who know their God will be strong and take action. Okay, and verse 33 and 34. Now, 34 says, now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join them in their hypocrisy. And some of those who have insight will fall to refine, purge, and cleanse. We'll that verse in a minute. So the angel says, Daniel, if you think the 70 years is the end, you've missed it. There'll be 70 years. And then at the end of that 70 years, there will be Ahasuerus who will dominate your land. Then there will be Alexander who's going to dominate your land. You know, you are going to go into your land, but these people are going to dominate it. Then there's going to be Antiochus the Great who's going to overrun your land. And then there's going to be Antiochus Epiphanes. Just because you're going back into the land doesn't mean you're going to have peace. And it says, in verse 34, when they shall fall. And some of these, now when they fall, they will be granted a little help. Now this is talking about Judas Maccabeus. Okay. This was the Maccabean revolt. So there's going to be some temporary relief from persecution, because there is going to be a revolution. But like many revolutions, it had a lot of folks hanging on, like, again, for what they could gain. But so it says that they're going to have a little help, and that little help is Judas Maccabees. Now, verse 35, and some of those who have insight will fall to refine, purge, and cleanse them until the end, because it still has to come to the appointed time. Now, why is this happening? Why are you doing this, God? Why are you doing this to the Jews? He says this in verse 35. It is to test, to purge, to make them white. And what does make them white mean? It means to burn off sin, burn off the dross. Okay? So nothing is as effective in driving people to God as suffering. Don't we know that? When things are going good, a lot of times we forget God. And God even told the Israelites before they went into the promised land, Deuteronomy, don't forget me. Don't forget all the good things I've done. Because when things are good, we forget God. But when we suffer, that's our thoughts go straight up to heaven. And so this is why, and God says, this is why I'm doing it, to refine, purge, and cleanse them until the end time. So God gave to Daniel through this angel. Now we're going to stop at this verse, because the next verse talks about actually the Antichrist, and we're going to talk about that next week. But God gave this to Daniel. Incredible layout of the suffering that the Jews are going to suffer through the Persians, through the Greeks, and you know who came after the Greeks? The Romans, right? Mm-hmm. And the Roman period was still, that's where we're going to get our final A, the Antichrist. But God has ordained it all, everything. But we're going to see encouragement, because in chapter 12, we're going to see that Michael, the angel of Israel, is watching over them. He's watching over them. So, and there's going to come a day when Michael's going to stand up for the people of God, and he's going to lead an army to protect them, and they are going to win. They're going to win in that battle. So, but in the meantime, there's going to be chastening. So we're going to stop here, because the next verse, then the king will do as he pleases. That's talking about the Antichrist. That's talking about the last 7 years of the 70 weeks. So we have a little break here in history. And so we'll go over that. And then if you go ahead and study chapter 12 for next week, we might get through 12. If not, we may take another week. But so from chapter 1 to 30, verses 1 to 35, all has to do with the history between Daniel and the turn of the millennium, when Christ comes, from Daniel to when the Romans take over. This is Israel's history, and all these fightings back and forth, the north and the south fighting over Israel. This is a precursor to what's going to happen in the tribulation. So that's why it is put in here. Not only to show Israel that they have a lot of suffering to do, but it is a precursor to when the Antichrist comes. But the Antichrist is not the end. God wins in the end, and the children of Israel win in the end. So there will be no more fighting over them. Are there any questions? Are y'all completely confused, or did it help make sense?
It helped a lot, Pam. Thank you.
Good. Okay.
Also,
Make sure, if you have time in your study of chapter 12, before you do that, is this, everything that I've talked about tonight is outlined in the back of your study book, page 111, and it talks about it. So since we've gone over it, if you read it again now, it'll make a lot more sense. But what we have to get out of this chapter is not the names. But the fact that God is sovereign and he is in control of all of this and he's working out his plan.
Amen.
It's amazing, amazing prophecy here. There's so much that has been fulfilled exactly the way God intended it to go. And this is it's just awesome that God has let us know all this. It's an incredible thing. Okay, any comments?
No, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're
Great,
welcome.
great study, Pam. Thank you so much.